Welcome here at INCAE, Professor Hennart. I would like to hear your opinion about Chinese firms. In particular, people in Latin America and Europe are kind of worried about the expansion of Chinese firms. And by people, I mean managers, policymakers. It seems that Chinese firms are more successful at internationalizing than firms from other countries. What do you think about this? What do you think are the reasons? And do you think Chinese firms are really a different type of creature?
So I think the great advantage of Chinese firms is that for most of them, they have a very large domestic market. A very large domestic market means that they can actually, or they have been able to bargain market access in exchange for technology. And a
With
best
Western
example,
firms, with Western and
with
Japanese
Western
firms.
firms. So the best, I mean, a great example of that is the fast train system, right? At some point, China was the only market for fast train system, the only real market for fast train system in the world.
For the
And
bullet train, you mean?
with
Yeah.
the bullet train, yeah.
Yes.
And what they did is actually the Chinese government uh, merged all Chinese train equipment companies into one, and then bargained with the four main suppliers of bullet trains. So that's Alstom, that's Kawasaki, that's Siemens, and that's Bombardier. And what they did is to force them, they basically went to each of them and said, we would like you to transfer your up to date technology in plants in China. And if one of them said no, like Siemens in the beginning said no, they would go to the other and say, and they would say to Siemens, but if you don't do it, we will go to Alstom and we'll get exactly the same as you can offer, and you'll be just out of the business, right? And so they did.
So the point is that the market is so big and so attractive that they can lure Western firms and they can bargain really hard to get the conditions they want.
Yes.
But then that means that the state has a relatively enlightened policy in a sense that it's favoring industrial upgrading, technology,
Absolutely.
and so on.
So I mean, they haven't been successful in everything, and up to now, for example, in semiconductors, they've been the less successful that they wanted, but in some areas they have been very successful. But what is also, I mean, what I found really striking here is that they were playing a game, right? Again, they were playing a game of collusion,
Yeah.
which made sense, of course, right? But the Western firms coming from different countries with a very naive idea that that WTO rules applied all over the world, basically played a different game, and in that game, the Chinese were better off. I think that's one aspect. The other aspect, which I think is very important, is the aspect of the follower, of the second in the race, that is very motivated with catching up and doing well.
So
And
that's sorry to interrupt, but that's like not dissimilar from what Japan did in the 50s, right? And
Exactly.
then South Korea in the 70s, basically
Exactly.
learning from the US.
Yes.
South Korea learned from Germany and from Japan. So the catching up and the learning curve is less steep
Is
because
less.
you can import the technology, you don't have to make the same mistakes, right?
Exactly. So
But that
you
doesn't last for too long.
it doesn't last for too long, and so of course after, and you have to also to understand that the game of Chinese firm has always been up to very recently the Chinese market, right? So the technology acquired was to compete with Western firms. Going abroad was much more of a sideshow, right? If you think even some of the acquisition, I mean, a very interesting story of the acquisition of Club Méditerranée by Fosun. Club Méditerranée, or Cirque du Soleil is another very interesting story. But in the case, let me go back to talk about Cirque du Soleil. Cirque du Soleil tried to enter China on its own for many, many years and was totally unsuccessful. Fosun acquired them, and they knew exactly how to adapt the product to the Chinese public. They had the connection, and suddenly they became successful. So this really is a big advantage.
So there is the issue that it's a very large market and that it's a very different market in many things, not in all things. I mean, you could argue in luxury is the same, but in many other things it's different. and Chinese firms know it well. So it's not too different, again, from the advantage that, let's say, a Brazilian firm could have in Brazil, but it's just much bigger in scale because of the size of the market.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're not different types of firms. They just benefit from a very different domestic market in that sense.
They have a very systematic industrial policy where they are looking at the very long run, and and are basically forcing the firm to adhere to this policy. Some of those firms, by the way, were not driven by the government. If you think of Alibaba, but again, the second runner, right?
Yeah.
Is more motivated than the one on top, and there was a huge amount of complacency on the parts of Western firms. So if you think of, for example, of servers, Cisco basically was selling servers in China with the instructions in English and never bothered to put them in Chinese, right?
Well,
So, and this is just one story among many,
yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So this complacency has, of course, advantageous second run, and I think that's some of the few elements. Of course, we only have 5 minutes, so we could go much longer. But those are some of the elements.
I think we have at least a couple of very important points in the size of the market, the complacency of the Western competitors, and the systematic and structural support that the Chinese state continues to give, which is not always efficient, it doesn't always work, but in many cases it does work. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hennart.